Hello everyone and welcome back. Today I'm going to show you how to make one of these lotus flower hair clips. These are so cute, they're super easy to make, and they offer a lot of freedom for design. You can see that I have a few different styles here, different petal arrangements, and the blue one here glows in the dark. And I will talk a little bit more about different design options for these later on in the video. For now, let's have a look at what I'm using and then we'll get started. So the first thing that you'll need is a hair clip. I am using these alligator clips that I picked up at my local Walmart. And for clay today, I am using some Sculpey Primo in light pink and bright green pearl, along with some complementary mica powders. I've got some red and pink, and then some moss green. For tools, you will need a razor knife, and then I've got a needle tool here, and if you don't have one of these, an embroidery needle or toothpick will work just fine. I will be using 3 round cutters in different sizes, and the tiny one here I am just using to punch out the holes for my jump rings, so you can certainly use your needle tool for that. The medium-sized one I will be using to make my dangles, and you just need 3 circles that are the same size. And the larger one here I am using for my backing. So all of these can be improvised. For the dangles themselves, I've got some curb chain here, some small jump rings, and then I will also be using a beading rod with a looped end or an eye screw if you prefer. You'll need a small pair of pliers to assemble them, and for decoration on these, I am using some flat back gemstones. I am going to use these dark pink ones. And last but not least, you will need a small piece of cardboard, a pencil, and a pair of scissors. I am making a cardboard template for my petals to ensure that they're all about the same size. So I am going to start by making a nice straight line at about the length I want for my flower. And for the petal shape, you want it pointed on the bottom and just slightly rounded on the top end. And then you can go ahead and cut that out, and these can be used again and again. So it does make things much faster, and it's super helpful if you're making multiple pieces. So I have rolled out my pink clay fairly thin here, and I am going to be using that cardboard template and my razor knife to cut out 5 of those petals. And now I'm going to set that sheet of clay aside because I will be coming back to it later, and we can begin texturing the petals. And I am just going to lay one on the tip of my finger here, and using my needle tool, I am going to start by marking some shallow lines, nice and straight, and working from the lower point outwards. And now I'm going to lay that tool on its side, and using those lines as a guide, I am just kind of rocking it against the tip of my finger. This is going to make those texture lines a little bit deeper, and it's also going to help thin out the edge of that petal. This is what it looks like, and I am just going to repeat that process with the other 4 petals. And now I can add some color. So I've got some rose red and pink mica powders, and I am starting with the rose red, applying it to the lower point and kind of dragging it up the edges a little bit. And I am using that lighter pink for the rest of the petal, kind of heavily on the tips, and then dusting it down into the darker color. And once those are colored, you can very gently peel them off of your work surface so that we can begin arranging the flower. And you want to start by selecting the 2 most congruent pieces you have for the inside petals. So I am going to take these 2, and I am just fitting those lower points together. And then I'm going to grab one for my center, and again, I am just lining up those lower points, and then the last 2 petals I am going to place on the outside, overlapping those inside petals and slightly overlapping that center petal as well. And once you've got all the petals placed, you can begin moving them around a little bit if you need to. You do want the lower 2 petals to be facing slightly upwards. And now that I'm happy with the shape of my flower, I'm gonna go ahead and grab that sheet again, and I am just cutting out a circle here for my backing. And for the center dangle on this piece, I am using a small heart. So I am gonna roll 2 balls of clay about the same size, and I am gonna start by pointing one end so that I have 2 little teardrop shapes. And then I'm going to fit both of those pointed ends together to form the shape of my heart. And then I'm going to lay it down and flatten it just slightly. And then I am going to pick it up and begin blending and smoothing that seam. So here is my heart shape, and then I've got that looped beading rod, and I have trimmed it down and bent the end a little bit. And I am just gonna feed this right through the bottom of that heart. And I also want to add some leaves to that center as well. So I've got some small green balls here, and I am once again just rolling them into teardrop shapes, and then I am going to press them flat between my fingers and add some texture lines. Just like this, and now we can add the heart to the center, keeping that loop nice and even in the middle. And I am gonna add one of those little leaves to either side of that heart, angled slightly downward. And for the side dangles, I've got this tiny round cutter, and I am just punching out a small hole on each one of these lower petals, keeping them evenly spaced on each side from that center. And then I'm going to dust that heart with some more of that rose red mica powder and add the larger rhinestone here to the center. And I am going to remove this before baking, but I want to get it pressed in there so that I have a nice recessed slot for it. This is what it looks like, and now we can go ahead and add the backing, and the circle I have here is just a little bit big. So I'm gonna turn it over, and I am just gonna measure this up here to those top petals, nice and even and centered. And when I turn it over, you can see that I have a little bit of overlap here. So I am just going to trim away a small section of the bottom with my razor knife so that that lower loop is exposed. And I am making some little lily pads for the dangles. So I've got a small sheet of that same green, and I am going to start by cutting out 3 circles. And then I'm going to punch a small hole in the top of each one for my jump rings, and then cut away a small pie-shaped section from the center of each piece. And then I'm going to take my needle tool again, and I am just making some nice straight lines moving from the center outwards. And now I've got some moss green mica powder, and I am going to dust each of the lily pads and the 2 leaves on my heart as well. Here they are. I've removed that rhinestone, and I am going to go ahead and bake these at 275 for about 30 minutes. And once your piece is baked and cooled, you can begin adding the rhinestones. And I am going to start with the large one here in the center of that heart. And then I'm going to add a much smaller rhinestone to the very tip of each one of the petals. And another set of smaller rhinestones, trying to keep them centered and evenly spaced. And then I'm going to add a 3rd stone only on those 3 outside petals. And I have added some jump rings to my lily pads, and then I am going to attach them to the flower with some short links of chain. So I am using 12 links on either side and then 15 links in the center, and attaching them just like this. And once you've got your chains attached, you can go ahead and glue your clip to the backing. Here is the finished piece. Now I did seal this with some gloss varnish to make it shiny and protect those mica powders. And if you find that you are limited on supplies or you just don't like the dangles, you can certainly omit them altogether and make just the flower. And coming back to those other designs, you can also play around with different petal arrangements. This is the first one that I made, and I have got the center petal here that I started with, and then I've got 2 sets, both overlapping. So the center petal is kind of hidden back here. I decided that I wanted the center a little bit more raised so that that heart could be better adhered, and the blue one was made exactly the same way that I did today's. I've got my 2 inside petals, my center, and then the 2 outside. And this is a little bit more rounded, so I definitely like this arrangement much better. The center one here is my favorite, and I simply added a few more petals. You can see the original flower here is these 5, so I added an extra set underneath that bottom one, and then 1 dangling here in the center. So again, there are a lot of different design options for these. That is all for today, guys. If you enjoyed this video, please visit my channel and also check out my midnight lotus flower earrings. And don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.